Welcome to Shortened Movies. Today I'm going to show a 2020 sci-fi thriller film called The Invisible Man. Watch out, spoilers ahead. Cecilia, or C for short, gets up from bed and checks on his husband Adrian. She has drugged him and is planning to escape. Sneaking her way through Adrian's mansion, she heads to Adrian's high-tech laboratory and disables the CCTV and the house's alarm system. She quietly heads to the garage, seeing Zeus, Adrian's dog, and decides to set him free as well. A car alarm gets tripped and Adrian is awakened. C sprints for the walls across Adrian's yard and climbs out as fast as she can, disappearing into the woods. C arrives at a lonely road expecting her sister Amelia. As she gets into Amelia's car, she drops the medication bottle she used on Adrian. Amelia asks C what's wrong, but before C could explain, Adrian appears out of the woods and smashes the car windows, demanding C to return. Amelia floors it in the sisters' escape. 2 weeks pass and C is staying with her friend, James. C is still traumatized by her escape and is in fear of leaving the house, even barely being able to make it to the driveway. She is on guard all the time, feeling that someone or something is watching her. Amelia arrives at James' house and C is immediately uncomfortable. She didn't want Amelia to come to her location because Adrian might follow Amelia, but Amelia tells her there's nothing to worry about as Adrian has died. Amelia shows C a news article about Adrian, a wealthy entrepreneur at the head of the field of optics technology, committing suicide. C explains to Amelia and James that Adrian's suicide makes no sense as he was a man of control, saying Adrian had control of almost every aspect of C's life. She added that Adrian abused her physically and mentally, and said that he also wanted a baby. C knew she had to leave before that, or else she'd never be free of him. She only prevented it by taking birth control pills secretly. Later that day, C receives a letter summoning her to meet up with Adrian's lawyer and brother. Amelia accompanies C and they meet with Tom, Adrian's brother and appointed attorney. Tom tells C that Adrian's final wishes are to give C $4 million. C returns to James and celebrates, even pledging to pay for James' daughter, Sydney's schooling. The following day they notice strange occurrences, namely the stove making its flames bigger and unlocked doors. This blows over when C feels a presence in a room with her and sees outlines of footprints standing on a blanket. She also finds the medication bottle she used on Adrian, which she lost on the night of her escape, and this convinces her that Adrian is still alive and has somehow invented invisibility. She goes to Tom and tells him about what's been happening with her. Tom explains to C that he too despises Adrian. He points out that he had to live with Adrian long before he met C. He reassures C by showing her a picture of Adrian's bloody corpse. Later that night, Sydney tries to cheer C up by offering to have girls' night when something hits her and she falls to the ground. Not seeing what happened, Sydney blames C, but C denies it, telling her and James that it was Adrian. James and Sydney don't believe her and leave. C is left alone at the house and she taunts Adrian. C takes a knife and spreads coffee ground on the floor awaiting Adrian, but nothing happens. She then dials Adrian's phone and hears ringing coming from the attic. Climbing into the attic, she dials once again and finds Adrian's phone with a knife, noticing something peculiar. She takes a bucket of paint, splashes it on the attic ladder, and comes face to face with a ghostly silhouette covered in white paint. She reels and the figure disappears to the kitchen. C follows and sees that it has washed off the paint. Grabbing a knife, she prepares to fight, but is immediately overpowered and gets thrown around by an invisible entity. C escapes to the road, takes a car, and heads to Adrian's house. C gets to Adrian's house and heads to the laboratory, finding Adrian's prototype invisibility suit, confirming her suspicions. C gets spooked and flees to the bedroom. She tries to hide in the closet but sees footprints on the carpet and runs. Escaping successfully, C meets up with Amelia at a restaurant, begins to explain what she found at Adrian's house, but a knife suddenly slashes Amelia's throat and lands on C's hand, making it look as if C had slashed her sister's throat. C is taken away by the police as Amelia dies on the table. She is taken to a mental treatment facility and is sedated, all the while screaming and shouting at a non-visible Adrian. Later on, C finds herself in disbelief when she's told she's pregnant. Confused and frozen in shock, C stares into nothing in her small cell as the doctor who brought the message leaves. James, who's also a detective, interviews C to help her, but loses hope when she tells them that Adrian is present in the room with them, they just can't see him. James believes that C has gone delusional and is slowly losing her mind. She also gets a visit from Tom, who informs her that the $4 million will be withdrawn as she's now being charged with murder. In a twist of circumstances, Tom tells C that she has the choice to withdraw the money or to have the baby and return to Adrian, confirming that Adrian was indeed still alive. Tom tells her that Adrian knew the whole time she was trying to use birth control and had switched it out, but now knowing that she is pregnant, Adrian is willing to stop the madness as long as C agrees to start a new life together. C refuses and sweeps Tom's things off the table. With Tom looking away, she takes one of his pens and hides it. C is taken back to her cell, and that night she takes Tom's pen and stabs her wrist, saying out loud that Adrian will never get her nor the baby. Just as C slashes down her wrist, something grabs her arm, and she grabs back, exclaiming that she got Adrian. She takes her chance and stabs Adrian several times, making the suit glitch. With the suit now malfunctioning, C can clearly see the Invisible Man. They struggle, but an officer enters C's cell. Surprised by what he's seeing, the officer is quickly disabled by Adrian, and C bolts out the open door. More officers respond, but Adrian makes quick work of them. As the suit starts working again, Adrian beats several officers, overpowers one, and takes his gun, and even kills some of them. Adrian tries to flee, but C takes a gun and goes after him. A cat and Vu chase ensues, and they end up in the parking lot. Adrian gains the upper hand, pins down C, threatens to kill Sydney, and takes off. Determined to protect Sydney, C steals a car and tries to get to James's house. A sleeping Sydney is awakened by strange sounds and pulls out her pepper spray. She randomly sprays it, luckily disabling Adrian. She tries to run but is quickly overpowered. James arrives and tries to fight off the Invisible Man, but gets quickly taken down and gets beaten to the point of unconsciousness. C arrives with a fire extinguisher and douses Adrian, making him visible. She then takes James's gun and shoots several times. The Invisible Man falls and C takes off his mask, surprised to see that it's actually Tom underneath the suit. The next morning, a tactical team enters Adrian's house and finds Adrian tied up in the basement. It seems to appear that Tom has masterminded everything, and Adrian and C are the victims. C doesn't buy it and still believes that somehow Adrian is behind everything. James tries to reassure her that everything will be all right, but she believes that nothing will be all right as long as Adrian is still alive. C later meets with Adrian for dinner in his house and tells him that if he wanted to be part of the child's life, that he should tell the truth and that he should admit to everything he's done. C begs him to admit to it, but he remains adamant that it was all Tom. Little did Adrian know that James was actually listening through a wire and watching through a CCTV feed. Adrian says something and C immediately recognizes it is something the Invisible Man had said earlier. She excuses herself to the bathroom. Sobbing, Adrian is left alone at the dining table when he suddenly raises his knife and cuts his own throat. He starts bleeding and choking on his own blood. C returns to see Adrian bleeding to death, and James sees this and runs out to help. C is hysterical seeing Adrian and dials 911, but as soon as she's out of the CCTV's view, she stops crying and maintains a cold look. She stares at Adrian, watching him die. C runs into James outside, and James spots the invisibility suit in C's bag. He then asks if she had any intentions at all to make him admit the truth on tape, and C answers yes, but reasons out that Adrian was unstable. C then asks what James heard on the CCTV. James and C share a look of understanding, and James answers that it sounded like Adrian killed himself. Subscribe the channel for more similar videos. Turn on the notifications. Leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.